So, compared to other stories, this is probably not really much of one. But I want to vent since this is still fresh for me. So I'm sorry if I'm just rambling and all over the place. We have a cleric who has been playing really well and balanced as our support and healer, and can pack quite a punch too when needed for offense. But apparently he got into an online argument about the cleric class on Facebook. I don't know where he went for the argument, but he was ranting about it to us on our Discord channel. And to sum it up, apparently he was pissed off that some people were arguing about a post on clerics being more than just healers. So we chatted to him about it, and we basically agreed with the cleric that he can really do quite a bit of damage and even managed to kill an entire horde of zombies with his Destroy Undead. We told him to simply ignore these people, that he was an awesome cleric, and just continue to do him. This is the most likely trigger as to why he started playing more offensively and healed and casted buff spells less frequently. And I get it. I also played a cleric before, and they can deal major damage when they decide to be on the offense. The thing is, though, the cleric class, at least with how our cleric plays him in combat, isn't built to focus on dealing as much damage as possible, but to be a balance between support, healing, and damage. The first few combats on the first session that we had after he vented on Discord, our group's dynamic in combat was kind of off, but we weren't really bothered by it, and we kinda just rolled with it. Roleplay-wise, the wizard just lightly pointed it out by commenting along the lines of, "Feeling a bit on the violent side today, eh?" whenever the cleric cheered hard every time he managed to kill any of the enemies. Our initial nonchalance might be because the enemies we faced weren't high threat levels, as that session was more focused on investigation and rallying allies. His behavior, however, also started to become unpleasant at times. He developed a sort of one-sided rivalry with our fighter, and FYI, I also play a fighter, but it's a different subclass, who was our main melee damage dealer, and the wizard, whose attack spells focused on AoEs when in combat. He was noticeably projecting the people who argued with him online onto us, especially with comments like, "Yeah, now you need the cleric to solve your problems," or, "Damn, good luck guys, I hope you don't die when the cleric's not with you to keep you alive," when our party separated. Like, bro, none of us ever invalidated your cleric. Ever. What are you trying to prove to us? So, did anyone ever talk to him about this? Tell him to calm down? Tell him to stop letting a stupid little Facebook argument of all things get at him? Me, personally, I got pretty pissed when he flaunted how much more damage he did than my fighter. And my response was just, yeah, no shit. Because unlike our other fighter, mine is built to be a tank and supporty. You know, so he can be the shield and divert attacks away from you guys? Which he just brushed off. The DM had already berated him on it by pointing out that we weren't the people that argued or invalidated his cleric class on Facebook, and he didn't need to prove a point to us because we acknowledged his essential role as a cleric, and to stop taking his frustration out on us and our characters. We echoed our DM's sentiments, and he stopped his comments, thankfully. But then shit started to go downhill super fast when we faced off one of the villains and her servants. Strategy-wise, the villain focused more on giving us curses and debuffs while her minions dealt the damage, and prevented us from getting to her. To name some of the debuffs, some of us were poisoned, or blinded, or frightened. It was quite a frustrating fight, but it was even more frustrating when the cleric refused to cast spells that could easily resolve our conditions, or heal anyone else, including himself. Every time it was his turn, he would only cast offensive cleric spells like Guiding Bolt, even using up his higher level spell slots to cast them. And sure, he would do damage when his spells hit, but he repeatedly got knocked unconscious, especially when he thought it would be a wonderful idea to run headlong into the middle of the enemy crowd and then be surrounded, just so he could cast his spiritual guardians. We collectively groaned when he said,
I'm a cleric. I keep the party alive. And the best way to keep the party alive is by killing those that are trying to kill us first.
When in combat, our bard, who was usually our strategist and the one making it easier for all of us to hit and kill things, ended up having to be the main healer with her healing words and healing potions. Especially every time the cleric fell unconscious. The situation turned really dire when it was just the bard still standing, cursed with 1d8 damage every turn, and outnumbered 3-1. One of the minions hadn't even been damaged yet, and the cleric's player went off at her, telling her to heal him back awake. I mean, it's almost like you're playing a class that could have just done that. But yeah, sure, rely on the bard. Jackass. Desperate, and thinking that he would cast Mass Healing Word to get us all back on our feet, she did so. And you know what the cleric decided to do? He used his main action for an offensive cantrip, which was probably Word of Radiance, and then he used his bonus action to cast Spiritual Weapon at higher level. And both spells missed. But what's even better is the villain used her turn to attack him. And with the bard's 5 HP of healing that he got, he was taken out. Again. We were close to a TPK, and even the DM sounded visibly distressed at how the battle was turning out. The bard managed to survive another enemy round. She was close to being taken out, but somehow managed to survive the minion's turn as well as the main baddies, as well as succeeding in her save to end the curse. And when it was her turn again, the cleric's player had the audacity to demand her to heal him back awake again. She ignored him, and woke me up instead with her last potion, because I was right next to her on the turn order, and also had a potion to help another player. The cleric groaned and demeaned her for it. She replied with,
"Since she is a character with a strong strategic mind, given what just went down, it is what she would have done."
Which has got to be one of the most satisfying, it's what my character would do, I've ever heard. I then managed to give the fighter, who, I might add, was on his last death save, the only potion that I had, and used Action Surge to finish off a minion with disadvantage because I was still poisoned. And Commander struck the fighter into attacking the villain who was right next to him, to which he got a nat 20 with, but she still was unfortunately not dead. And then the wizard's death save came up, and by some digital dice miracle, he also rolled a nat 20 and was revived with 1 HP. Now, this is where we all got a bit sidetracked, because this is the first time that anyone rolled a nat 20 on a death save. We weren't sure if the wizard was allowed to do anything on the same turn that he was revived on. But, regardless, the DM decided to allow one action, and would apply it for any future nat 20 death saves in his games. Anyway, the wizard used the Scorcher spell, which I don't remember the name of, but it's basically just fire damage in a straight line. And he used it at a higher level and was able to kill the villain with it. And we ended the session by dragging the last surviving minion back to our base. We stuck around a little longer after that in the voice channel to discuss the session, and we did a little bit of analysis on the combat with some metagaming knowledge. The cleric's player was pissed and complained that he could have finished the fight and gotten us all out of that situation faster if only the bard had healed him. Sure, buddy. Keep huffing your own farts. The DM challenged him on that and asked him what he would have done if the bard had chose to heal him. To which he said that he would do the exact same thing that he did with the missed spells. And, as I said with how the battle went down, even if he did manage to land both spells and took out the villain, they still would have gone white by the 2 remaining enemies. And that is only one thing. But the bard then brought up a very interesting point.
Wait, how many spell slots do you even have left?
He stalled a little in answering by saying that he would check his character sheet, and stumbled in his words. And guess what? He only had his cantrips left and several low spell slots. His spiritual weapon would have been casted at its lowest level, even if he pulled through on his plans. Which means that, even if he landed both spells, and both at full damage, he and the bard would have also been wiped out by the enemy's turn. The revelation made things awkward in the chat for a moment. So, the DM directed the conversation to the fighter and wizard's nat 20 miracles that happened at the last moment. The fighter also added that even he wasn't sure that they could have won despite his nat 20, and even revealed that during the combat, he PM'd the DM for some way to let him sacrifice his character so that the others could survive and escape. I gave a bit of an input question on the encounter's difficulty level, and the cleric chimed in that the encounter was too rough. The DM had told us that, although the encounter was made to be made difficult, befitting one of the main villains, it wasn't the most difficult encounter that we had faced, especially compared to some other high-threat encounters that we had had. He pointed out that we fought harder enemies before with even worse rolls. Plus, we were even at a lower level back then, and still managed to beat them. And at some point of our discussion, the wizard went full frontal with the cleric, asking why he wouldn't heal anyone, even himself, and that it wasn't cool to make the bard deplete a lot of their spell slots for healing words while he kept abandoning us like that when we were dying. The cleric got defensive and argued back that everyone else had a form of healing or self-healing to take care of themselves, except for the wizard. But even then, he also had a potion, which is why the cleric assumed that everyone would be fine. He got rebutted on that when we pointed out that everyone, including himself, was knocked out, except for the bard. And the fighter was so close in making a new character with his 2 failed death saves. I don't remember what else was argued, but I think it struck a chord in the cleric who got pretty quiet when the wizard more or less said something like,
If you have now stopped caring about our characters, at the very least you could still try to care about your own, instead of caring more about proving a point to a bunch of internet strangers that you argued with like 3 weeks ago. They're not even here to watch our sessions and see you prove them wrong. Hell, even if they were watching our sessions, you're not exactly proving yourself right either.
We echoed the wizard's feelings, and then he just abruptly left the voice channel. Not exactly sure what's going to happen in the next session, but the DM says that he'll discuss things with the cleric after giving him some time to cool off. And that's where we are now. I don't really know how to end this post, but I feel better after regurgitating this out in writing, though. Have a good week, I guess? Well guys, I for one am fond of playing clerics. I like putting little spins on what type of character or person they are, and indeed, you can be a cleric that mostly doesn't heal. You could be a cleric of a war god, for example. As a cleric, you have a plethora of spells, items, and abilities, and so on, that you can use to your advantage, offensively and defensively. You can do damage, as well as tanking it and healing it. But limiting yourself in this way, not because it's a character quirk, which could just be a problem in of its own, or for some other reason that might make sense in the setting, but simply because you're trying to prove a point to internet people who have nothing to do with your session, you're quite simply a goddamn jackass. Don't squander your kit to try to prove a point to a bunch of people who are agreeing with you. No one should expect a cleric to just be a heal bot. They can do so much, but refusing to heal when you're playing a class that can get your whole team back up to fighting condition and not have to make entirely new character sheets, and instead forcing that role onto a person who doesn't do it nearly as well, you are in the wrong. If you don't want to have to heal other people, go play a fighter or something. And on note of the DM, he really needs to stomp this shit out. One player effectively having a temper tantrum nearly got his entire party killed. And if that happens, the entire game might get killed. And as a final note, don't try to be a main character. Even if the main villain was the last enemy alive here, if it's just 2 people and you can get someone else up, you should probably do it. Yes, maybe you can kill the villain, but what if you don't, and they kill you next turn? Rather than being lauded as the hero now, the entire group will likely be pointing at you and yelling at you for not having gotten them up, much like this story. Anyway guys, that's it for this one. So, as always, have a good one.